Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Someone recently reached out and asked me, what is durable fiat? Is it logical? And how does it apply to the nuclear sharing topic? So here's my TLDR answer to those questions before I explain the specifics in a second. Durable fiat means the resolution is not immediately overturned once it is hypothetically passed in the pro world, so it remains implemented in place for some reasonable amount of time. Is it logical? I think it is, but my interpretation of durable fiat is quite specific. I think that durable fiat means that all of the barriers that currently exist to the resolution being implemented are overcome permanently. I don't think that it means that new barriers cannot arise from exceptional circumstances afterwards that stop the resolution. I think interpretations of durable fiat that do suggest that the resolution will continue being implemented forever in the future and will never be altered or canceled by any extreme changes that might arise are illogical. How does it apply to the Septober topic? It definitely means that the nuclear sharing agreement gets established and stays established for some reasonable amount of time. If you subscribe to my interpretation of durable fiat, then the agreement could be overturned by like an exceptional circumstance, like Le Pen getting elected in 2027. If you subscribe to the more extreme interpretations of durable fiat, then it means nothing can ever stop a nuclear sharing agreement, and it will continue indefinitely in the pro world, which I think is illogical. So how did we get here? First of all, what is fiat? Fiat is a Latin word that vaguely means let it be so. The idea is just we're debating a statement that has the word should in it. And so the debate assumes that the thing happens, right? We are debating if the thing happened, would it be a good idea? We're starting with an if statement, right? If the thing happened, would it be a good idea? So we don't care at all about if it is possible or if it is feasible or if it is likely in the status quo. In fact, we would rather it not be likely in the status quo. And it's not just a debate concept. This is just basic logic, right? Like this is just how a should statement works in conversation. If I say, "Hey, I really think I should be president," and you were like, "Psh, I don't think so. You will never be president." I'll be like, I said I should be president, though, not that I will be. Like, this is just how language works. So fiat is not just a debate concept, but for some reason it gets treated as if it's this magical, magic wand debate thing that doesn't exist in the real world. No, it's just logic, it's just linguistics. There are two funky things that complicate fiat for our purposes, especially in public forum. The first one is this thing called inherency, which is a stock issue that we are adopting a little bit from policy debate. The idea is just the thing we're debating about, whether or not it should happen, it has not happened yet. It's not happening now. And that's why we're debating about if it should happen. This gets funky though, because sometimes things change during the resolution's time frame. While we're debating it, maybe it actually gets planned. Like news headlines appear that say it's going to happen in the status quo. In this case, I think the best interpretation is like if you vote con, then this like cancels the resolution from happening, which is what I call like negative fiat, not fiat on the negative, like not counterplans, but like negative sign fiat, right? This shouldn't be that complicated. I think that the con's position of the debate is quite obvious, right? We're just negating the statement that has the word should in it. So the stance that the con has to take is that this thing should not happen. So it doesn't actually really matter logically if the thing is likely to happen right now or not. The pro says it should, the con says it should not. Who cares if it's likely going to happen right now? The pro offers pros, the con offers cons. Nonetheless, it doesn't make that much sense to say we should start doing something new if that thing is already something that we're doing. So when people write the resolutions, they usually do have this idea of inherency in mind, meaning that they're written at a time when the resolution is actually quite unlikely to happen. If you don't have this like fiat concept, right? So for instance, the French nuclear sharing agreement with the EU is incredibly unlikely to happen right now. Even if France establishes some bilateral nuclear sharing agreements with like Poland or Germany, they're not going to establish a nuclear sharing agreement with the EU. And the reason is because no one really wants that right now. But there's one other thing that when you put together with inherency makes this a little bit weird, which is something that's specific to PF. So the other thing that makes this weird is that in PF, we're debating about the most likely implementation of the resolution. And that's what the pro world actually looks like. And I think this is weird for some people. A lot of people come in from like LD or policy where they get to pick and defend or advocate for certain versions of the resolution. Like I want to do this specific kind of nuclear sharing arrangement that like is perfect in these ways. That's not what we're doing in PF. And the reason why I think it sounds complicated, but it actually is pretty intuitive. Like, think about it this way. I'll give you two examples of relatively similar statements. And I want to think about like what your intuitions are if you heard this in casual conversation and someone was like trying to debate you, but like informally, about this statement. So if the first statement is the US should put people in jail, imagine you have to write an essay that's like yes or no. I think most people would choose yes, unless like I maybe you have a more radical take on this and you think that like all prisons should be abolished, which fair enough. But I think most people would pick yes. But the reason that most people would pick yes is because, technically this statement sounds true if there's any circumstance that currently exists. If there's any people that you think the US should put in jail, then the statement the US should put people in jail applies, right? Like if I can name you two people that the US should put in jail, then the US should put people in jail is true, right? And this is actually like kind of intuitive. This is how people, I think, often approach this topic if this is a statement that is given to them to debate or like write an essay about or something. But then compare this to a different statement. And I think you'll see what I'm getting at here. This statement says Congress should pass tougher sentencing laws that put more people in jail. Now, I think if you were asked to write an essay on that, you might be more likely to pick the no side. Because I think when you're bringing this kind of thing up in casual conversation, like if, for example, if I walked up to someone on the street and I was like, "Hey, I think Congress should pass tougher sentencing laws to put more people in jail. What do you think about that?" And they were like, "Oh, I think that's a terrible idea. Most of the laws that Congress has passed that increase sentencing, they actually overcrowd prisons and they also are racially targeted. They put more black people in jail than any other demographic group. And I think this would just perpetuate that kind of system, which I think is really bad. That's what's most likely to happen if this were to happen." And then I'm like, gotcha. I actually think that you're wrong because what I really meant is that there exists a type of tougher sentencing law that is perfect, that is not at all like the things that you're talking about, which technically would put more people in jail. And that one is what I think is good. So technically, the statement that I told you is true, even if your argument is also true, because that's not what I'm actually proposing. That's not what I'm defending. Like, this is very unintuitive. They would be like, okay, but like clearly that was not what were saying. Like, that's not like an obvious intuitive interpretation of the statement that you made. You're just trying to do like a gotcha tricky thing. But this is weird because in the one statement, that was actually the intuitive version, is that if there exists like a people to put in prison, then the statement is true. And that's like how most people would approach this. But in this statement, that's like the least intuitive way to approach this topic, at least in casual conversation for most people. And so this actually doesn't seem like it's such a foreign concept that in some topics and in some debate formats, in this case, you approach them with this idea of being able to say that the statement is true by defending some version in which the statement is true. Whereas in other statements, it's more logical and more intuitive, actually, to debate about the most likely way that this would happen by debating sort of outside looking in on the actor that is passing it, rather than prescribing a specific version of the statement that you think the actor should do. And so PF is just that latter interpretation of should statements. It's just we're interpreting the most likely way this would happen, the most likely thing that this would actually look like, and then debating from there. That's the characterization of the pro world. That's what the pro, I don't even want to say is defending, because defending is language that's very much rooted in LD and policy concepts of Fiat, which are like the first version of the statement that I was talking about. We're not really defending anything on the pro. You're just analyzing a possible policy that you have no bearing on. You don't get to pick the version of what it would look like. You're outside looking in, giving the pros or cons of a possible policy. The problem is when you combine this idea of like we're debating about the most probable implementation, when you combine that with this issue of resolutions are written with inherency in mind, you get this weird problem where the most likely implementation of a topic, well, if the topic is written under conditions that make it very unlikely to happen, then the most likely thing that happens is like it just gets reversed immediately after it passes, right? For example, like what if our interpretation of Fiat is like all of the Congress people who are passing the policy, they get put in a trance. They get like, completely hypnotized momentarily into believing that the policy is a good idea. So they go in the Congress and they write the policy and they pass the bill. And then immediately they like snap out of their trance and they're like, they all look around, they're like, what just happened? That was a terrible idea. Let's undo that immediately. Like, this does not create good debates, right? Like, they just hit the undo button and then nothing happens. At best, you get like a confusion disad on the con, and that's it. And so we have to do something about this. And the thing that we have to do is not just fiat, which is that it happens in the first place, but durable fiat. It has to actually be able to overcome those initial conditions that made it unlikely in the first place that gave it inherency. And so that's why we have some durability to this fiat. We say that it's not just that you overcome those conditions, it's that you permanently overcome those conditions. They don't ever snap out of their trance. They continue thinking that it was a good idea to pass this policy, or at least they don't like undo it immediately, right? So you permanently overcome the initial conditions that were preventing the policy from happening. And that makes sense. That makes for debate. It makes for better debate, but it's sort of necessary to debate it at all to be coherent. So we need the thing to be sticky. We need it to last, which is why people say fiat is durable. The question, though, is how durable? Like, when the sun engulfs the earth, are we still going to have to continue sharing nuclear weapons with the EU? Things get weird. Even if you don't push it to that extreme, here are four examples of where things are a little bit weird in actual PF resolution. So, one is that I debated a topic about, this is like January 2020, I want to say, about removing US sanctions on Venezuela. Now, at the time, and actually still, there was like a dictator, Nicolas Maduro, doing a lot of things the US doesn't like, being authoritarian in Venezuela, and that's the reason that we have sanctions on the regime. I talked earlier about the con having sort of a cancellation negative fiat, which is also durable, right? If the pro fiat is positive fiat is durable, then the con cancellation should also be durable. Otherwise, you get the same kind of like weird thing that doesn't seem to make sense linguistically, where like the con can be like, well, we're saying we should not do this, but actually we're going to do it too. Like, that's not how debate works, right? So if you vote con, then you can't turn around and then do the thing later. You're con. So you continue not doing the thing, which is durable fiat, right? But this becomes weird, right? Because the reason that we have sanctions on Venezuela is because of Maduro. What happens if the sanctions work and like we topple the regime and then like the opposition that we're supporting gets in power? Does durable fiat imply that like we have to continue sanctioning them if we're successful? This is weird, right? Like that's a bit absurd. The second example is the Baltics topic. So back in this is one of the September topics that I was coaching. The idea was that NATO should increase defense commitments to the Baltic states. And this makes sense. Same thing happens here, right? The con would say that NATO should not increase defense commitments to the Baltic states, which, if you have an extreme interpretation of durable fiat, implies that they should never increase defense commitments to the Baltic states. But then you have to turn around and you got to ask, like, under what circumstances is this coherent? Like, okay, if the con can never increase defense commitments to the Baltics, what happens if Russia invades Estonia? NATO is just not allowed to intervene because that's a defense commitment. That seems absurd. That's like a crazy stance. That's a crazy position to force the pro into that probably the writers of the resolution never intended and probably just doesn't make logical sense. The third example of how this becomes a bit absurd was an example on the pro. This time I've been using con examples. Was a topic that I debated back in like 2018 or something. There was like it was a bit of a quirky topic. It was the US should prioritize reducing the national debt over improving economic growth, something along those lines. It kind of makes sense, but then you think about it. What about certain circumstances? What about a recession? In a recession, governments have to spend a lot of money in the form of fiscal stimulus to like sort of charge up the economy and get out of the recession, to bounce back. And this naturally, this is a lot of money, so it expands the national debt when you do it. So if you vote pro, does that mean when there is inevitably, because of the business cycle, a recession, does that mean you have to continue voting pro through the recession? You have to like continue prioritizing the national debt and at the expense of economic growth. And so then you're not allowed to pass any stimulus and you like permanently stay in the recession. That seems like absurd for the pro to have to argue for. You've imposed this weird like durable fiat straitjacket on the pro where they're not allowed to ever like deviate under any circumstances that change at all, and they'd like have to keep that policy forever, even when it doesn't make sense, which is a bit weird. I think that borders on absurd. The fourth example is actually this topic, the nuclear sharing topic. I think if the French government changes to a far right government that, like, for example, if the far right president is elected in 2027 as a result of campaigning against the nuclear sharing policy, do they have to continue the nuclear sharing agreement? Like that's kind of crazy, right? Like it sounds so unintuitive to me. It doesn't seem logical at all. So these are just all four different examples of where I think this could become very absurd. But these are all hypotheticals, right? These haven't happened. So here are two examples of things that have actually happened that have to do with durable fiat on different topics. One is I remember a round, like a demo round against Dalton YS that I did on the Medicare for All topic, where they made an argument that said after we pass Medicare for All, the Supreme Court will simply overturn it, which reverses the pro benefits. Can they do that? That seems intuitively like a major violation of durable fiat. Maybe that's unfair, maybe that's unintuitive. I don't know. Second example, there was a super popular strategy on the TOC 2020 topic, which was about withdrawing US forces, nearly all US forces, from the Middle East or from West Asia, what have you. Um, this is weird. The strategy was on the con, people would say, um, they will just come back. So what people would do is this really sneaky strategy. They would say, okay, the pro is going to say US forces in the Middle East are terrible. Interesting. How can we deal with that? What if we say, if we pull them out of the Middle East, then something will happen that causes the US to send back even more than were originally there. Then we can sort of get a link turn on like the entire pro side of the resolution nearly, which is crazy. Like that's so strategic to be able to do. It's so strategic it almost borders on unfair. Like how do you deal with that as a pro team? That seems like if the con wins any scenario and they're able to prove, which is pretty easy, that this would bring the US back in because the US still has a vested interest, then they suddenly like flip your entire offense, which is kind of wild. So is that fair? Is that intuitive? Does that violate durable fiat? These are questions we have to be asking. So, how do we answer all of these questions? How do we have a coherent understanding of what durable fiat does that doesn't have these weird, unintuitive, unfair, absurd conclusions? My conclusion is that fiat should be somewhat durable. It should be durable enough that it overcomes the initial conditions that were holding it back. And in fact, it does so permanently, right? So, like, any of the opinions in the EU that are preventing the resolution from happening, or any of the political movements in France that are opposing the resolution, those all just get resolved, and they get resolved permanently. So they never crop back up such that they would reverse the resolution. But if a major shift happens, if some sort of crazy exogenous effect happens, that would hurt the resolution, that would cancel the resolution, then it gets overturned, then it gets canceled. For example, a change in administration. This is the most obvious one. I don't think it makes any intuitive sense to be arguing about a policy in the US and say that, like, in the next cycle, in the next presidential election, it doesn't get overturned. This is just not how things work, and it doesn't really make sense, right? Like, I think it's intuitive that new administrations or exceptional circumstances will shift things and like reverse policies and stuff like that. A country being eliminated is another example. Like, are you expected to continue sanctioning Venezuela if Venezuela doesn't exist or something? Or like a war happening, right? Like that should change what rules people follow. That does change what rules people follow. Those are exceptional circumstances that, in my opinion, um, are, they sort of are able to overturn the resolution despite durable fiat. I think maybe the administration thing is debatable. The other ones I feel like are very intuitive. Let me know what you think in the comments. But I think that like the Supreme Court, for instance, or other existing politicians overturning something, that's suspicious. That seems like it's a clear violation of durable fiat that is unfair and unintuitive and renders the debate less meaningful. Anything that involves the conditions that currently exist in the status quo, like those inherency conditions, leading to the resolution being reversed, I think is totally a violation of durable fiat. If it comes after the resolution as a result of some new exceptional circumstance, I think it doesn't violate durable fiat. But I think there's room to debate. Technically, this is still a super blurry line, don't get me wrong, but I think it's a lot more coherent than most of the durable fiat discussions that I've heard, which exist on these weird extremes. We should introduce a bit more nuance into it. But let me know what you think in the comments, and maybe you can change my mind a little bit, and we can all learn about how PF debate really works together.